Hey there. So today I am getting into the second installment in a series that is focused on, um, sorry, I want to make sure that the video loads up correctly here. The second installment on setting up action strings to in Dorico. Now this is rather specific, but it sort of creates a way for us to address a whole sort of umbrella of questions about working with Dorico and VST instruments. And the main thing that I'm going to cover today is how you set up custom instruments, because that's a new feature, I think, in Dorico 5. And then not just custom instruments, but then custom playing techniques and playback techniques. And a lot of confusion naturally occurs between these two things called playing techniques and playback techniques. It's not all that clear from the name what you're talking about. So I'm going to discuss what those are, how you'd use them, and I'm going to actually show you how to do that as well. Okay, so a little bit of background here. What can you do with playback techniques? So essentially, playback technique is like telling Dorico about a key switch. So if you are used to using VST instruments, I'm sure you're used to using key switches. These are basically just a key on the keyboard, a MIDI note like C0. And when that note is triggered, it is going to tell the VST instrument to do something specific. Most often, let's say on a string patch, it's going to tell the difference between play pizzicato or play spiccato or play legato, some kind of bowing technique, something like that, like a technique or articulation change. That's what key switches generally are. And for all intents and purposes, playback techniques really are just ways to tell Dorico about these key switches, right? It's not always a key switch. It's not always a MIDI key. Sometimes it's a MIDI CC value. There are some libraries that, where it'll be, depending on the MIDI CC value, that will trigger some kind of articulation change to the instrument. And both work in Dorico. You can set up the playback technique even to be a combination of the two, right? So I'm going to show you how that works. Playing techniques are really just labels. They're things that you can create. You can create as many as you want, and the basic ones that are familiar to many composers are already built into Dorico, like legato, for example, is a playing technique. It's something you'd see in the score, you'd read, and then you'd know as a player what to do. The playback technique is kind of Dorico's back-end information. Okay, when legato happens in the score, what should Dorico do with the VST instrument to make sure it plays back correctly? So playing technique is what we see. Playback technique is what Dorico does in the background. Instruments are our way of creating our ensemble in Dorico, and we can set up, thankfully now, any of our own instruments. So it used to be the case that you could only use the instruments that were built in. Now I think with Dorico 5 you can add your own instruments. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to switch over to, let me see, where is it? Oh, I gotta switch my screen on here. It is not registering for whatever reason. So I'll just make sure that gets dialed in. Hopefully now you can see. There you go. You can see my screen. Let's bring up Dorico. Where is Dorico? There it is on one of my other monitors. Sorry about the technical difficulties there. Okay, so what I got here, I just basically got 4 chords, and when I play them back, I've got this nice ostinato thing going on, right? And I've got them labeled here, main theme, variation 1, variation 2. And over here in my playback techniques, or playing techniques, you can see that I've got main theme, variation 1, 2, 3. So these are all playing techniques. These other ones are ones that are already built in, like these non-vibrato, that sort of thing. I created main theme, variation 1, 2, and 3 on my own, because if I go into the play mode and I open up my action strings element here, and let me just bring all this onto one screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. In here, in action strings, whether you're familiar with action strings or not, action strings basically gives you 4 slots for a main, 3 variations, and then it's got all these single articulation slots. which I'll address maybe in another video. But what I just wanted to point out, that's why I have main and 3 variations in my score, just because they correlate to action strings. All right, so how do we set this up? So let's go up here to the library menu up here. So I'm in Dorico. Go up to the library menu, and I'm going to come down to playing techniques first, okay? Playing techniques, like I said, is just something that you're going to find over here in the menu. It's something we're going to put in the score. So I can really create any old playing technique I want. I'm going to create a copy of my variation 3, and I'm going to call it new thing. All right, and I'm going to change the text to new thing. And it's going to trigger, variation 3, which is right here in you'll see playback technique, right? So I'm creating a playing technique. This is just what we're going to see in the score, but it correlates to a playback technique. I'm just leaving it at variation 3. So I'm going to hit OK, because I'm just trying to show you how I could change this, right? So I'm going to replace variation 3 here. I'm going to get rid of that. And now in my playing techniques, I have new thing. So now I've added new thing to this chord here. And what we're going to find is that when this triggers, and let me just get my windows open here. What I want to do is just get my action strings visible like that. Sometimes the edges of my screen here, my mouse, I don't know, something about the Apple trackpad. I don't know if maybe I don't want to waste time on it, but it gives me a lot of headaches. Anyway, so I'm going to play this back. You can see it goes to main theme over here. It's going to go to this square, C#0. Then it's going to go to variation 1, variation 2, then variation 3, even though it's called new thing. And that's because I created a new articulation or a new playback technique. So here we go. Same thing again. Goes to main, variation 1, variation 2, back to variation 3. Okay, so that's what's going on there. And you can see how I set up a playing technique. So what about the playback technique? Let's go and check that out. So now again, under the library menu, instead of playing techniques, I'm going to go down to playback techniques. All right, and that's, sorry if it's a little disjointed as I zoom in and out. But let's take a look at this and see what's going on here. So I've created a thing here called, under lengths actually is the category I put it under. I put variation 1, 2, and 3. So I've got variation 3 here. If I create a new playback technique, then it would show up in that little drop-down box back when I'm setting up a playing technique. And so what are some things you can do with playback techniques? It's pretty cool. One of the main things you can do is you can actually use another existing playback technique as an alias. In other words, if I wanted variation 3 to really just do Coleño, for example, then I could just select Coleño here, and anytime something's marked as main thing, that's going to correlate to playback technique variation 3, which is just going to be an alias for this. So you could give it different names. And you can also create playback techniques that incorporate multiple techniques. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's actually one of the really cool things that you can do. So before I get into that, I just want to sort of take this step by step so it's easy to follow, right? So we've created a playing technique called new thing. That new thing playing technique is connected to this playback technique variation 3, and variation 3 is here, and this is what it is. Okay. Now, what does it do? That is something that we need to go into our expression map to coordinate. So I'm going to go back over here into expression maps, which is under my playing thing here. Let's go back down here. I've got this action strings, expression maps. I'm going to go into expression maps much more in the next lesson. It's a pretty big topic, but I want you to see how this all connects, right? So I created this new expression map. You can create as many as you want. These are ones that I downloaded for other libraries that I have. But I just created this one called NI Action Strings 2, and then I can create any playback techniques that I want. So let's say, you know, I want marcato. I've already got marcato over here. So I select these things. But you could say that you wanted to have marcato mixed with, you know, I don't know, weird, but you could say that you wanted to mix multiple items, so muted and marcato, let's say. You could select both of these and create a new one. And it would actually mean that in your score, when something's marked as marcato and muted, then what do you do? What key switches do you run? You could say, well, I want to run, you know, key switch C3 or whatever like that. So the expression map is where you choose a selection of playback techniques. And then what do they do? So the playback techniques are really just names for adding in here to your expression map. And like I said, I'm going to go into how to work with expression maps in a later video, probably the next one. That's going to be the main thing we focus on is expression maps, because there's a lot going on here using CCs, two different, a primary and a secondary dynamic control, having track delay, which we've talked before about on my channel. You can also do conditions, so you can have an articulation that depends on how long the note is or what the velocity. You can also set note off events, right? So you could say trigger a particular key switch on a note off event, not just on note on. So there's a lot going on in expression maps, too much to go into on this video, okay? So I'm not going to go into this too much, but let's go discard changes. What I wanted to show you today was that you can create playing techniques. They show up here in the menu. You add them to your score so they're readable. In the background, your playing techniques correlates to a playback technique, which I have here under, I just happen to create it under links. You can create it under any category you want. But I created these ones called variation 1, 2, and 3. I connected new thing to variation 3. And then in my expression map over here, I created a new expression map where I created an action on variation 3. The key switch that fires is E0. Okay. Now, an expression map has to get loaded into the instrument. Again, there's a lot going on with expression maps. Too much to go into now. I think I'm not sure how long my video has been already, but it's been plenty long. I want to cut out of this. Let me see if there's anything else on my list here. So yes, playback techniques can be combined. That's important sometimes because you'll actually see you might get unexpected results where you maybe you mark a note as mercado, let's say, or actually I did this just recently. I had like a trumpet line, and the trumpet line, you know, I started with the marking legato, which I was intending would be for all the notes that followed, you know, until I set a different thing. So, but it applied legato to some of them, but one of the notes, it was applying this natural playback technique, and that was problematic because in the middle of this smooth legato line, there'd be this like sharp attack on this one note, and I was pulling my hair out trying to figure out what that was. And what it was that the note, because of the way the expression map had been set up, that note, because of its length, was being assigned to natural. And I didn't have anything in my expression map that combined both legato and natural. So it just went with the natural. So when you're setting these things up in your expression maps, you can combine multiple things. Like you can say, when it's legato and natural, then do this. But if you don't have a combination, then the natural overrides the legato and it plays something unexpected. So although you can combine them, it's important to understand that if you don't combine them, sometimes those combinations might occur in your score without you knowing them. And how do you troubleshoot that? Let me actually show you. If you go into the play mode here, or actually, I'm sorry, you can be in right, but I'm going to bring up the lower zone here, and I'm going to go to the MIDI view. And what you see down here is this playing technique lane. And you can actually see what the playback technique is that's being used for each of these notes. So I can see main theme, variation 1, 2, and 3. These are the playback techniques that I set up. But if so you can always use the playing techniques lane here to kind of identify, well, what's going on, even if it's not all that clear on your score, if you're getting a note that's playing incorrectly here or there. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else on my list here. There is this playback technique called natural, which many of the instruments have by default, and this goes back to pre-Dorico 3, where sometimes you needed to actually turn off, you had to manually turn off all of your prior playback techniques. Using what that problem has been fixed since Dorico 3 with something called mutual exclusion groups, which again I'll get into with our discussion of expression maps. But mutual exclusion groups basically say, you know, within this group, when I switch to legato, you know, it's mutually exclusive, let's say, to mercato. So if the previous note was mercato and then I hit legato, I don't mean legato and mercato. I mean legato always takes over from mercato. So you can set up exclusion groups that say, basically when I switch, forget any other articulations or playing techniques in the past. But prior to Dorico 3, it didn't do that. It sometimes would layer these on, and the kind of fix was to go to the natural, this built-in natural technique. So a lot of times there's a natural technique built in, and there is something on the screen here. I can show you. It's right here. You can see natural right there in my playing techniques. But I don't use the natural playing technique, and it's still there, probably to be backwards compatible. But now with mutual exclusion groups, that problem doesn't happen anymore. And if you're using Dorico Pro, then the auto exclusion group is set up by default, which means that you shouldn't have this problem. But in the occasion that you want to have two articulations joined together, like, you know, you want to have, let's say, marcato and, I don't know, muted, then you can blend those two together under one playback technique in your expression map. It's pretty cool. Attribute versus direction is worth talking about when you are, let me switch back to here and go to playback techniques. So under library, I'm going back to playback techniques. And right here, you can choose between attribute and direction. And what that means is attribute would mean that it only applies to the note that it's on, that you've added that playing technique to. Sorry, let me zoom out here. The idea of direction is that once you apply, say, marcato, that all notes will be marcato until you set something else, right? So direction versus attribute is an important thing here that you can set in this window. I talked about aliases. Let's see if there's anything else. I think that is it for now. I gave you kind of the history and background on the mutual exclusion groups and the natural. An example would be like soltasto and crescendo are two different techniques that you might want to pair because you want the soltasto sound on your cello, but you also want it to crescendo. So that would be an example where you'd want to link, you'd want to create a playback technique in your expression map that actually is a combination of two playback techniques. Next time, we'll get into expression maps. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And if you have questions about stuff I've discussed here or that you anticipate I might discuss in the next discussion about expression maps, leave questions in the comments and I will certainly check them out, and I'll make sure to incorporate those answers into the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody's support as I try to grow this channel, and I will see you again on Monday. Bye for now.